This is what nobody tells you about how to be elegant as an introvert. The elegance advice you've been handed isn't just unhelpful, it's working directly against the one real advantage you already have. Elena was 31 the year she decided to fix herself. She had a good job, a small apartment she kept beautifully, and a recurring problem. She left every professional event feeling like she'd failed an exam nobody had graded. So she did what anyone would do. She typed "how to be elegant" into a search bar at 11 at night, and then she kept going for about 9 months. Forums, comment sections, whatever the algorithm served her next. What she found was consistent and confident and completely wrong for her. Work the room. Make sure you speak to everyone. Mirror their posture. Match their energy. Remember 3 details about each person and reference one later. Have anecdotes prepared. Never let a silence sit. Smile before you speak. She was a diligent woman, so she did all of it. And it worked, in a narrow sense. People found her pleasant. She got invited to things. She could hold a conversation with a stranger for 11 minutes without a single dead patch. By every visible measure, Elena had learned how to be elegant. Here's what the visible measures missed. She started keeping a kind of private ledger, though she never called it that. After every event, she'd sit in her car in the parking garage before driving home, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 40. She couldn't listen to music. She couldn't call anyone. On Sunday mornings after a Saturday party, she'd cancel whatever she had planned. She got sick more that year than she had in the previous 4, and she noticed, though it took her longer to admit it, that she couldn't remember most of the people she'd been so careful to charm, and that not one of those 40 introduction evenings had turned into a friendship, a mentor, or an actual opportunity. That's the ledger. On one side, 40 introductions. On the other, a full day of recovery, a body that kept getting sick, and nothing that lasted. She was paying an enormous amount of energy for something with almost no return, and she assumed, the way most of us do, that the problem was her stamina, that elegant women simply had more of whatever she kept running out of. What she didn't realize yet, and what nobody names when they talk about introversion and social anxiety in the same breath, is that the exhaustion wasn't a character flaw. It was the cost of performing a role that wasn't hers. Then came the dinner in February, the one where she was too tired to perform. Elena had come off a brutal week. She'd said yes to dinner months earlier and couldn't get out of it. So she went, and she made a decision in the entryway that she thought of at the time as giving up. She wasn't going to work the room. She'd sit where she was put, talk to whoever was next to her, and leave early. Which is how she ended up spending 2 hours watching a woman named Ruth. Ruth was somewhere in her 60s. She was not the most beautifully dressed woman there. No statement jewelry, no designer labels doing the work for her. And she was, by a considerable margin, the quietest. She spoke to perhaps 5 people the entire evening. She told no anecdotes. She laughed at other people's, though never loudly. And every single person in that room bent toward her. Elena watched a man interrupt his own story to ask Ruth what she thought. She watched the host check twice whether Ruth had everything she needed. When Ruth put on her coat to leave, 3 separate people crossed the room to say goodbye, and 2 of them asked when they'd see her again, and they meant it. Elena drove home that night with a question she couldn't put down. Ruth had spent less energy in 2 hours than Elena burned through in 20 minutes. And Ruth had all the standing, so she started paying attention to what Ruth was actually doing, and it came down to 3 things. The first was that Ruth listened like it cost her nothing, because it didn't. When someone spoke to Ruth, she wasn't running a background process. She wasn't scanning for her opening or rehearsing her next line or tracking who else she still needed to reach. She was simply there. And people can feel the difference between someone waiting to talk and someone actually receiving what they said. Elena had been performing attention. Ruth was giving it. Performing attention is exhausting, and that's exactly why it doesn't work, because the strain leaks out around the edges and everyone senses it even when they can't name it. You can read it in someone's body language before they say a single word. The slight restlessness, the eyes that don't quite land. The second thing was the pause. Ruth let a beat sit before she answered. Not a long one, half a second, sometimes a full one. Elena had been trained by everything she'd read to eliminate exactly that gap, to keep the surface smooth and unbroken. But the pause is what makes an answer sound considered instead of retrieved. It's a small thing that signals something large, that this woman doesn't need to fill a silence because silence doesn't frighten her. That quality, that particular stillness, is what most people are actually describing when they use the word charisma, not charm, which is a performance. Charisma is presence with nowhere else to be. And the third thing was the one that changed Elena's life. Ruth went deep, and she did it with almost nobody. 5 people. 2 hours. She didn't spread herself in thin layers across a room. She spent everything she had on a handful of people, and those people walked away having been genuinely met, and that's rare enough that they remembered it for years. Elena had been going for coverage. Ruth was going for depth, and depth is what people are actually starved of. None of this is new. It's the oldest material in elegant ladies' fashion and etiquette, the part that predates the internet by roughly 2 centuries. The etiquette authorities, Emily Post, the finishing school traditions she codified, were never actually teaching people to talk more. They were teaching restraint, attention, and the patience to stay with one person long enough to actually hear them. What's new is the advice that replaced it. Now, here's the part that matters for you, because nothing Ruth was doing is a personality trait. Every one of those 3 things is a capacity introverts already have and extroverts have to work at. Susan Cain spent an entire book, Quiet, making the case that introversion is not a deficit to be corrected, but a cognitive style with genuine advantages in exactly these domains. Deep attention, comfort with silence, a preference for a few real conversations over many shallow ones. Elena had spent 9 months and a good deal of her health trying to overwrite the exact equipment that would have made her magnetic. So she rebuilt it. She stopped setting a target for how many people she'd speak to and started aiming for 2 or 3 good conversations, and she let that be a complete evening. She stopped preparing anecdotes and started preparing questions. When she felt the pull to fill a silence, she counted 1 beat and let it stand. And she gave herself an exit time before she arrived, so she could be fully present while she was there instead of rationing herself against a night with no end. She also did something less obvious. She built a 15-minute buffer into either side of every event, a short walk, no phone, nothing to solve. She'd have called that indulgent a year earlier. It's really just how to practice mindfulness and calm in a chaotic world, applied at the only moment it actually pays off, right before you walk into a room full of people. 9 months after that February dinner, Elena got an email from the host. A small dinner, 8 people. The kind of invitation that doesn't circulate. She had spoken to fewer people that year than in any year of her adult life. Here's what all that advice got wrong, and it has cost a lot of quiet women a great deal of unnecessary suffering. Charm is a volume business. Charisma is not. Presence is not. Charm requires you to be everywhere, and it fades at roughly the speed of the drive home. Presence requires you to be somewhere entirely with one person, and people carry it for years. You were never behind. You were handed the extrovert's manual and told your exhaustion was a character flaw. The most elegant person at the next event you attend won't be the one who spoke to everyone. She'll be the one 3 people go out of their way to find before they leave. If any of this sounded like your own life, you're in the right place. Wealth Atelier is built for women who'd rather be remembered than noticed. And if that's you, subscribing is how you make sure the next video finds you. Leave a like if Elena's parking garage felt familiar. And if there's a quiet woman in your life who's been told for years that she needs to come out of her shell, send this to her. She's probably never heard anyone say that the thing she was told to fix is the thing that makes her magnetic. Everything we've talked about here lives in one place. It's our playlist called Elegant Ladies, Fashion and Etiquette, and it's the long version of this idea, the manners, the presence, the way a woman carries herself when she isn't performing for anyone. Start anywhere in it, and we'll see you there.